Welcome everyone to Banned Books for Brunch. I'm Sierra,
And I'm Em.
and the purpose of this podcast is to raise awareness and shed light on the many books that are deemed controversial or banned. Book bans serve the interests of groups that have long sought to dismantle public education and shut down conversations about important issues. We do not want to have a part in that, and we also want to encourage anyone listening to read banned books as well. It's important to make sure that these books continue to exist and that we're supporting the authors that write them. We may also go over books that are not necessarily banned, but provide facts and education that we think are important for everyone to know. These might include topics we think should have learned in school, but didn't, or any information we deem important to speak about. We want everyone to know that these books belong, and so do you. So, just to give before I get started, I guess, this is the spoiler episode from our previous episode. So this is going to give the last half of the book away of Out of Darkness by Ashley Hope Perez. So if you're listening and you want to get a full review of the book and not just know the second half, go back an episode and listen to our very first episode. This is episode number 2. So without further ado, just to give a little recap from the teaser episode, we were introduced to Naomi, a big sister to Beto and Carrie, who were just relocated from San Antonio to East Texas by the twins' father. Henry sucks and we hate him because of the countless traumatic things he put Naomi through during childhood and because of his general entitled behavior in the present, not to mention taking them away from their grandparents to live in a totally new place. Feel free to talk whenever you want to, okay?
Yeah, we hate him.
We hate him.
Nailed it on the head. We hate him.
Oh, the 3 siblings formed a friendship with a boy around Naomi's age named Wash, who lives in a nearby town called Egypttown. It took most of the first half of the book, but after having a crush on each other for months, Naomi and Wash finally admit their feelings toward each other and begin spending time with each other in secret. He is a black boy
Young love.
girl, and at this time it was completely unacceptable for something like this to happen. I put in parentheses the horror.
Truly, they couldn't wrap their feeble minds around it.
Yeah. And if I forgot anything that you realize, just ask and I will fill you in. So now before I start, I want to add a disclaimer here that there's a lot of things that happen in the rest of the book, like rape, domestic violence, and just overall traumatic things that happen. So just be aware of that as I tell a story. That's going to be a trigger for you. You probably shouldn't listen. But here I go. So, continuing with December 1936, the book starts to give more details about Naomi and Wash's meetings in the book. Pretty early off, the book starts to give more details about Naomi and Wash's meetings in the woods, but they still are nowhere close to being bad, in my opinion. They're not graphic or vile in any way. They're just doing what teenagers do. There's nothing wild that goes on between them so far. Christmas comes and the children each get to receive 2 gifts, which was more than they had ever had before. The twins even made a present for Wash, which was a homemade wooden ornament painted with the river, trees, and woods, which is the woods that they hang out in all the time, which is really sweet. Obviously, Wash has become a really important part of not only Naomi's life, but the twins as well. Wash made Naomi a ring with birds carved into it, which is super cute. One of the gifts Naomi gave Beto was a red hardcover journal, and he was in love with it. He really likes to read. Ever since the kids moved to this area, the twins began reading the rest of the encyclopedias that they have at their school, beginning with A and just going from there. Like literally just reading all of the encyclopedias and like absorbing it like sponges. They were
I love
learning
it.
a lot. Yeah, they were learning a lot and they learned really fast. Naomi got the journal for Beto, keeping this in mind, telling him that someday he might write his own journal. Other than this, or writing his own encyclopedia, sorry, not journal. Other than this, just generally being sweet, I wanted to read a page out of the book to show just how important this gift meant to Beto. And it's also relevant for why we're doing this podcast in the first place. It says, this is from Beto's point of view. Back at home, Beto and Carrie sat by the heater in the bedroom and waited for Naomi to come. Beto spun the wheels on the truck and Carrie folded her ribbons, which is what she got from Naomi. When she was done, she picked up her doll, then dropped it with a sigh by the side of the bed she shared with Naomi. Her eyes were fixed on the guitar case under the bed. Don't, he warned. I'm not doing anything, she said, but he could tell she knew what he meant. Beto picked up the small red book Naomi had given him. Carrie, he whispered, come here. He handed her the notebook. Does this seem heavy to you? She balanced the book in her palm. No, she said, but maybe I'm stronger than you. She was, Beto knew, but that wasn't it. He took the book back. There it was again, that strange weight. Not good, not bad, powerful. So this is a big foreshadow for what is to come in the future, too. And as you can see, even young children have the capacity to understand that books are not dangerous. They are not good and not bad, powerful, as the book stated, which is part of the whole point we're doing this podcast. So I thought that was really cool.
Surely, yeah. The more you read, the more power you have.
Yeah,
I feel,
and just the
especially
more,
now, like,
yeah, opens your mind. I just thought it was a really cool tidbit to bring up. Anyways, moving on with the story, Henry had gotten Naomi some yellow fabric for Christmas so she could sew herself something. She'd been doing a lot of sewing and was getting pretty good at it. She also had a class at school where each girl had to sew a dress for herself as a homework assignment, so this actually worked out pretty good. One day, when Naomi was working on the dress and feeling pretty good about herself for how good it was turning out, Beto came into the room with a pretty odd statement. Without any context, he told Naomi that she shouldn't wear the dress. Confused, she asked why, and his response was, that dress, I've got a bad feeling about it, just throw it away. So if you can't already tell, Beto is one of my favorite characters in the book. He's just really sweet. And I feel
yeah.
emotionally invested in his character at this point. So as I was reading this, I was thinking, yeah, like just throw it away, Naomi. If Beto doesn't like it, then you shouldn't have it.
Get it out of here.
Yeah, which sounds dumb, but that's how I felt. Which is obviously biased, but the interaction kind of filled me with a little bit of dread, wondering what was wrong with the
Like,
dress.
what's going on with this dress? Yeah.
Yeah, and what's going to happen because of this dress. Like, yeah. So obviously Naomi didn't actually decide to throw the dress and fabric away just because her brother had a hunch that something was bad about it,
Yeah.
which is probably what most people would do if they were in the same situation. After all, she had put a lot of work and time into the dress already. She wasn't going to literally throw it all away. Right after this, Beto asks Naomi if he can help her cook something for a church gathering they're going to for New Year's. And of course, Henry enters the room with perfect timing to tell him cooking is women's work, same as sewing. Act like a man, Robbie. Go outside and get your hands dirty. You don't be toughening up. I might have to drown that cat of yours.
Oh my God, we hate Henry. Fuck Henry.
I know. Like,
Big
it's so
Henry
uncalled
hater.
for. Oh, and that's a little bit of foreshadowing too, just to give you a little suspense. Henry had gotten the kitten for the twins a little while ago as a gift to suck up to them. But anyways, what the hell was the deal with that comment? As we've already addressed. It's not really surprising he said that to Beto based on what we know about him so far, and because of the time period we're in, but still, what the hell? No excuse for something like that, in my opinion. He's literally just a boy that's curious about the world. He wants to learn as much as he can, and he wants to spend time with his big sister. We hate Henry more and more the more we get through this book. The comments also make Beto feel bad about himself too. Each time Henry makes a comment like this, Beto seems to shrink a little bit when all he wants to do is make his quote daddy like him. He just wants to make him proud. So it just knocks him down every time. It's also important to mention that Henry also acts creepy around Naomi, especially when it's just the two of them. So when she was working on the dress one night, she could tell he was just standing there watching her. And before he left the room, he told her that she's going to look real pretty in that dress. So it's just kind of the beginning.
I hate him.
Yeah, he's really weird. He's messed up. There's a boy named Gilbert that has approached Naomi now 2 times when seeing her out in public or at a church social gathering. Not maybe a love triangle, but question mark, but not really, because he tells her that he likes her, but she shuts him down like immediately. She likes Wash, so she's not gonna entertain, the idea.
She's like, I don't have time for this.
Yeah. So right after he approached her one night, she basically disappeared into the woods to find Wash. So she's not interested at all.
Yeah.
She's like, get out of here, boy. What is his name?
Go on, get
Gilbert.
Go on, get Gilbert.
Get Gilbert.
Gone. Yeah.
Okay,
Get
now
out of here.
he's gone.
Scram.
We don't want you here. Okay, January 1937, Wash and his father, Jim, ended up getting a meeting scheduled with the board members of the White School to discuss using some of the oil money to help the school that Jim works at and Wash attends. As Jim expected, it didn't go over very well. First of all, when the two showed up at the school at the time that the meeting was scheduled at, all of the doors of the school were closed and nobody was even around. So since Mr. Crane lived so close to the school, they decided to walk on over to his house and remind the superintendent of their meeting, like maybe he forgot. The door was answered by the housekeeper that urged them to go away, stating that Mr. Crane was not available that night. Of course, Jim and Wash weren't believing her, and when Wash looked up into one of the second-story windows, he could see Mr. Crane peeking out of the window down at the bullho. So Wash called out
Yeah.
to him and didn't just ignore him.
Caught in 4K.
Yeah, he called out to him to let him know he wasn't being as sneaky as he thought. And not long after, Mr. Crane did come downstairs to the door, but he was with a man named Mr. Gibbler. And Mr. Crane apologized and explained that a change such as the one that they were trying to make requires the whole board to be present for the meeting to vote on it. Before he could finish, Mr. Gibbler butt in to say that they're voting by being absent. So in other words, the whole school board didn't even want to hear them out or frankly give them the time of day, so the answer was automatically no. Mr. Gibbler tried, and Mr. Gibbler is a super rude, entitled guy
White
too,
man.
so he's just really
Yeah.
irritating. Mr. Gibbler tried to using the excuse that the year before the white school had given the black school new furniture and books for the classrooms and libraries, trying to make it sound like they're doing so much, like they're being so generous. Understandably, Wash was getting pretty annoyed because he knows that this isn't the whole truth. He had to basically fix all of the furniture given to them because it was in such bad shape, and all the books were missing pages and lessons out of them, so that it wasn't even like full books. And Wash doesn't just think about this, he actually speaks up and brings it to their attention. He decides that if he wants to be the person that Naomi needs, he needs to step up and say something when the time is right, instead of the groveling that he thinks his father does. It wasn't taken super well that he spoke up, but definitely didn't end as badly as it could have. Luckily, because of all the work Wash has done for Mr. Crane, he knows him pretty well. Wash knew his father was going to be mad and disappointed in him for even saying anything about his opinion the way that he did. And he was, but Wash was starting to change, it seems. And he made the comment to his dad, "You were right. We're dealing with some cold, cold hearts here. Heck, it'd take an explosion to wake them up." Which, do you remember what happened in the beginning of the book?
Oh, I remember.
The school blew up. So
That's
I was
almost
like, what kind of foreshadowing is that?
some heavy.
Yeah.
Laying it on thick.
Yeah, and it doesn't look good that it was Wash that said that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah,
Wash, what are you up to?
I know, it's scary. So the plot starts to thicken a little bit here because we find out that Miranda, one of the girls at school who's basically a bitch to Naomi all the time just because she isn't white. Miranda. Yeah. She's also jealous that Naomi is pretty. So this girl happens to be Mr. Gibbler's daughter. So of course it makes sense why she's evil. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But anyway, she starts, quote, whispering to people about Naomi and Mr. Crane's colored boy.
Eesh.
Yeah. I've mentioned some of the creepy things that Henry does to Naomi, but now it's starting to escalate a little bit. Henry starts drinking more often and coming home drunk. One night he basically forces himself on Naomi and is calling her by her mother's name. She manages, yeah, I know. She manages to get him to unwrap his arms from around her, but the whole situation was really gross and highly concerning, obviously. He acts like he's changed and that he's a God-fearing man, but he's not.
It's not giving that.
No, sure is not. After this happened, Naomi has trouble sleeping for days because she feels or fears for her own safety, and she's exhausted because she can't sleep. Henry was making himself scarce again, probably because of what he did, and he didn't want to own up to it or apologize. But one night, after Naomi finally had a good night's sleep, she was woken up by Henry in the morning with a glass of water being thrown on her, and all he said was, "Breakfast." Then he left the room because he wanted her to make him breakfast. And she
What
wasn't
is this guy's problem?
like, he's an entitled white man back in the 30s.
Also, thank God we've evolved because in what world you get woken up by some man by getting water thrown on you?
Yeah, that's never happened to me.
Oh,
Water thrown on me like ever to wake up, but I would be so
it is
mad.
kind of horrible because it makes me think of that Vine where that girl's asleep and she gets water poured on her. She goes, "Hello."
I
You
don't
know that
remember that.
one?
No.
Oh,
Vine was so
well,
long ago.
I know. Do you got a bait or
Or
not?
not. Yeah, I knew those guys.
We
Cameron
love
Dallas.
them.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. And then Shawn Mendes
Nash,
was like,
Nash Greer,
yep. What did they call themselves all together?
the squad. I don't know.
I don't know what it was either. I thought they had a name though.
Yeah, they definitely did.
And some of those vines were so stupid, like when they would all get together and make vines together. So it was like all
I
of them in one
know.
video. We thought it was the coolest
Well,
thing.
it was only 6 seconds. Like, how much, like, what really could they do?
Well, I remember one was like a bunch, they were all on like this cart and they just like slid by the frame of the
Yes.
camera from one side to the other. And I
And
thought
it was
it was
that
like
song.
so
Do you got a
hot.
bait or not? And
Yes,
then we were like, we're gonna make a vine.
I know.
And we did.
I know.
So
We made a
I don't
few.
even remember what it was called, but to all our listeners out there, find us on Vine.
Yeah. That would actually be really funny. If someone ever finds us, let us know.
I know.
Okay, anyways.
Anyway, sorry.
Where was I? Oh, yes. So Henry wants breakfast. His belly is empty. After Naomi gets up and rushes to make his coffee and biscuits, she walks back into the room after she woke the twins up, and Henry catches her eye and smiles at her. In Naomi's words, he grinned at her like nothing had happened. No,
Yes.
not like nothing had happened, like something had happened, something good, something shared between them. Which is ew, which is not the truth. That
So
no,
fucked.
he's so wrong. Ugh.
You're so gross.
Yeah, okay.
Henry haters unite.
Henry haters here. All right, February now, moving right along. This month starts off super disturbing with a point of view from Henry. And I'm going to read page 208 because I figured that, like, there's no describing it. I just have to read, what his thoughts are.
Yeah. God. Okay.
Once Henry was sure Naomi and the twins were gone, he came out of his bedroom and locked himself in the bathroom. He braced himself against a sink and held Naomi's slip up to his nostrils.
Ugh.
He breathed in the smell of her and set to work on himself. It wouldn't be like this for much longer, but he had to manage until everything fell into place.
You're joking.
No.
You're
Sometimes,
joking.
sometimes he began by thinking of Estella or the plump redhead he'd frequented at the chicken ranch before he got saved. But it was the same as every time since Naomi had come to live in this house. He needed to imagine her to finish. The sooner he finished,
Ugh.
the sooner he could pretend he hadn't done it. After he washed his hands, he shoved the slip back into her drawer and closed himself into his room to sleep. I know, is that so
Ugh.
gross? I feel gross even
Maybe this
reading
book
it.
should be banned.
Don't say that.
No, I'm kidding.
No, it does get pretty graphic and
Ugh.
disgusting. Yeah,
That was crazy.
yeah, I know. But I think it is necessary to hear all of these points of views from each character to understand their whole character.
The gravity of the situation.
Exactly, yes, because this is a very serious situation. The book is a very serious book. Up until now, we only suspected what Henry was thinking, but now we actually got to read exactly what's going through his mind and the horrible thoughts that he is having about Naomi and has been
God.
having about her. Then immediately after, Henry surprised Naomi with a Singer sewing machine that was their neighbor
Wow.
Muff's, but their neighbor doesn't use it. It had been broken, and he paid to get it fixed and fixed it so that you wouldn't have to use the pedals at the bottom to make it go. You could connect it to electricity. So this was super nice for the
Whoa.
day. Yeah, Naomi was actually grateful for this gift because, of course, she likes sewing. But I wrote, I can't help but wonder what Henry's intentions are. Like, there's
Yeah.
like strings attached. It's
Clearly,
not
this
just
is
like
not out of the good of his heart. Like,
right. Now I just want to mention that there's sort of a scene between Wash and Naomi and their tree. In my opinion, I don't think it's graphic. Again, I think a lot of it is left to the imagination, and a lot of what is said is just how they're making each other feel. It's not like we're
Hmm.
getting a play-by-play of a sex scene with how they're doing it, but I'm 24 and I'm not in high school, so I can see how some parents might be shocked and against their children reading this. But at the same time, I think that if I were a parent and my child was at this age, begin to become like sexually active, I wouldn't restrict them from reading this. So
Yeah.
this is the kind of topic that starts the controversy, in my opinion, about what is appropriate and what is not. Obviously, if you're
Hmm.
listening to this podcast and know at all about what it's about, you know where I stand in this situation, where you do too. So, but I just wanted to say that I do get why parents might be concerned and try to protect their child. But in my experience, I haven't ever seen a situation like this where a parent tries to protect their child and hide their child from something that it actually has the outcome they had planned. I think
Yeah.
that you can try and protect and shield forever, but at some point the world is going to come crashing in, whether you're like
Yeah.
or not, and that child will end up finding this out one way or another.
Hmm.
So to add to that, I don't think there's any reason to be ashamed of reading something like this. It doesn't make you any less of a person or a good person in any way. So now that I got that out of the way, we can get back to the story. But I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, I don't know, we were talking about it at the end of the last episode, but I think it's really important that like the youth, teens get access to like literature where they can feel represented and like
Yeah.
what teenagers aren't like fantasizing about their crush or like wondering what it might feel like to be their age and like
Yeah.
making a first romantic move on somebody. Like, I don't know. I think it's really important
And
that kids have access to these and like including some of the bad parts. Like,
yeah,
if, if somebody feels seen or like, oh my God, this sounds like something I lived through, like maybe it's like the last push that gets them to go get some help or like reach out to somebody or I don't know. I think it's important.
exactly. That was very well said.
Thank you.
And even if it's you read it and it's not something you agree with, that doesn't mean it should be banned. You know, like
Yes.
just because you're offended by something doesn't mean that you should have it taken away for everybody else.
Open up, snowflake.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Moving on. A huge curveball is thrown at Naomi when she finds out that Muff, like I said, her neighbor, and the pastor both think that Naomi likes Henry and that they should get married.
Huh?
I
Her
know.
stepdad?
She's 17 years old.
Right, right,
Naomi can barely
right.
think when Muff tells her this, but she can't say that she doesn't like Henry because Muff can tell that she does like someone. And if it's not Henry, she'll want to know who it is. So of course Naomi can't give that information away because of how wrong it is to like Wash. So she's going along with the lie, basically saying that she does like him. And
Mhm.
now we know what the gift of the sewing machine was for. Henry does want Naomi to marry him, and he's just like trying to
Ugh.
be nice to her or whatever. So from the moment Naomi moved to town, Miranda, Mr. Gibbler's daughter, has hated her. But this hatred only grows more as time goes on. Miranda was getting pretty desperate for a boy to hang out with her, so she ended up agreeing to go on a boat ride down the river with a boy that she used to play with when she was a little girl. And as they were floating down the river, she noticed something in the woods that did not belong. It was Wash, Naomi, Carrie, and Beto celebrating Wash's birthday. Obviously, there was a reason for that the four of them were being secretive about them hanging out together, and now they've
Right.
been caught. And so
Sure.
this was all too, of course, convenient for Miranda, who wants to throw Naomi in the dirt every chance that she can get. In Miranda's words, Naomi was a N-word loving hussy. And then it said she told and retold the story. So she's spreading this around school and around town.
Right.
Like things are gradually getting worse and worse. Like it's coming to
Yikes.
a head and like you don't know what's going to happen. So now in March of 1937, which by the way, this is the month that the prologue took place in of the explosion of the school. So we're getting
Hmm.
really close to that now. This
Hmm.
month begins with Naomi running out of options of what she's going to do with her life when Henry randomly proclaims to her that he thinks that they should get married. And this
Ugh.
isn't a sort of asking situation. He's
It's
telling,
like we're getting married.
yeah, he's telling her that they will, and this is what is right. In his words, it is sanctified and that it is God's plan for them. So he's using that excuse.
Yikes. Using God's plan as an excuse is crazy.
I know.
We're seeing it here as an excuse for someone to get married. I've heard it be used as an excuse for people to break up. That's just a crazy excuse.
It is crazy.
Don't be using that as an excuse.
No,
That's crazy.
no.
Especially when you're in such a position of power.
I know. I know.
We hate Henry
It's
here.
just, yeah. Yeah. The whole time, Naomi hasn't said a word to Wash about Henry and the way he is or anything about his intentions. She's just been trying to like avoid the topic completely and just have like a good time when she's with Wash. But now Naomi knows she has to tell him about the proposal. When she had the opportunity to, though, she couldn't find the words. And the next thing that happens that makes matters even worse is when Naomi gets a letter from her grandmother stating that she should marry Henry, that it is the right thing to do, and that she should not come back home. There's no place for her there. So Henry
Okay.
had contacted her grandparents and told them about his intentions and got them to agree to it because of the whole like having a man provide for you and having security and like a roof over your head, stuff like that, not like for any of the other reasons like being safe in your home or like being in love
Right.
or anything like that. Understandably devastated, Naomi runs out of the house to Wash's to get his help. And when they meet in their tree, Naomi managed, even though it was really hard for her to tell him everything. And so I'm going to read a page out of the book so that you can get Wash's reaction. And just for some context about what they're specifically talking about was, I think I talked about this in the episode before, but Henry, before the twins were born and when Henry's mother was still alive, Henry would make Naomi as a little girl touch him. And in order to get her to do so, he would tell her that if, like she did it and didn't tell anybody, that it would keep her mother safe.
Oh,
Yeah. So that is what they're talking about in this part. Wash says, nobody should be alone with that kind of burden. I could have saved her. No, Wash took her face in his hands. Listen to me. It was wrong what he did. You had to stop him. A man who could do that to a child, he wouldn't stop at anything. Not with you, not with your mother. It wasn't your fault, Wash said. He planted each word like a man laying down bricks. Naomi closed her eyes tight and laid her cheek on his shoulder. Now he knew. She had no idea what the knowing would mean for them. We've got to think, Wash said slowly. In the letter, your grandmother talks like this is something that's going to happen soon. Him asking you, I mean. He already did, Naomi mumbled. And that's what you were trying to tell me about yesterday? You know how I am. Sometimes the words just don't come. And you already told him no? Naomi stiffened and began to protest. What else would I? Of course, maybe we could. Now Wash felt the frustration of not having the right words. It doesn't matter what I said. He hasn't accepted my answer, she gestured at the letter. He gets started with the church stuff, and suddenly everything he wants is God's will for me. What good is time? I don't see what choices I have now. She felt a tightness rising in her throat as her future unrolled before her. It would be her unhappy face in the wedding photo, then laundry, dusting, biscuits, cooking ham hocks and beans, mending. The twins would grow up and move out like children do, and then there would be only the ceaseless housework. And Henry. No, it was even worse than that. Him forcing his leg between hers and
ugh.
pushing her down onto his bed, taking her in the bathroom, in the closet, a bun in the oven, Henry's child. She shuddered and remembered the sound of her mother's crying, overlaid with the squeaking of bed springs. All those miscarriages. So many wrong things that could never be made right. What am I going to do? She said again. We, he said firmly. What are we going to do? The words were another line of bricks in the defense against the world.
God.
So that's pretty hard to hear. And obviously, Naomi feels desperate to do anything to get her out of that situation. But luckily,
Yeah.
Wash
God.
really making it obvious that it's their problem, not just her problem.
He's so good to her. Ah,
He's very mature for his age. So now that Wash knows the full situation and the weight that it carries, he gets to work trying to find a place for him, Naomi, and the twins to go. The situation is extra hard because the three different skin tones that they all have, he decides
oh God.
is the best place to go. After school one day, he's tasked with helping one of the janitors at the New London School, which is the white school, check all of the heaters because kids have been complaining of headaches and eyes burning. They aren't done checking the whole school, but the janitor wanted to call it a day and say that they were finished when they were not. In the 3 hours they were working, neither of the two found any problems with the heaters. Meanwhile, Naomi is also making a plan. She decides it will be the best thing to do to go along with Henry's idea of marriage to make him happy, only she tells him that she wants to wait until the end of the school year is over. Then they can get married. This gives
What
them
a freak.
you know, this gives them 3 months to leave, and Naomi decides she can handle pretending for a few months. A few days later, on their mother's birthday, the explosion happens. Naomi actually ended up being outside because she had to go get baking soda in a supply closet for class, which was outside, I guess. She was still
Mm.
knocked to the ground, and when she was able to look at what was going on around her, she saw the roof of the school rise up and rip open in a fountain of debris.
God.
Yeah. So this is where we start to get into the really heavy, even heavier stuff. So
Mhm.
we go into the part of the book called After, and up until now, excluding the prologue, it was before. So now it's
Mhm.
after because the explosion has now happened.
Right.
The first thing we know after the explosion takes place is that somehow Wash found Beto and was carrying him away from the school ruins and ended up finding Naomi. Beto does not know where Carrie is, and it is all he can think about. Wash went back into school to find her, and now I'm going to read another page in the book to explain what Wash finds. Wash was pushing aside a desk when he saw it, Naomi's other shoe. This time, the shoe wasn't empty. He recognized the gray and blue stripes of Carrie's sock sticking out from under a fallen bookcase. He sucked in a deep breath and began emptying the shelves. When the books were mostly out, he flipped the bookcase over. His pulse pounded in his ears. His mouth went dry. There was no right way to do what had to be done. He took off his jacket and wrapped Carrie's leg in it. Then he looked for the.
Oh
I know.
God.
He told himself that he needed to hurry, that she was losing a lot of blood. He told himself that because it made it easier to search. He heard a shout of "Everybody out!" just as he saw the plaid of Carrie's good dress showing under a block of concrete. The walls groaned around him. Plaster began to fall in chunks. He ran to the spot and fought to shift the block. He could not move it, could not move it. And then he could, and he did, and he found her. Her face flattened. A trickle of blood marked her temple. More was matted in her pale hair. He lifted Carrie onto his shoulder, scooped up his jacket, and ran.
God.
Yeah, yeah, it's so sad. Yeah, I have
This is like where the red fern grows sad. Sadder.
Yeah, I never watched that movie or read that book because I knew it was sad, but I've heard it's really sad.
It's really sad. Not as sad as this.
Yeah, it gets worse. So
Okay.
Wash managed to get out of the building before the rest of it collapsed, and he barely made it. His next thought is that he has to tell Naomi and Beto before they can see Carrie's broken body. So he leaves Carrie's body in a place he'll remember and went to tell the two siblings, and of course they're in shock. How do you go about confronting the fact that one of your siblings is dead when you saw them alive minutes before? Of course, they're both not taking it well, but Beto is unconsolable. He doesn't know how to live without Carrie by his side all day, every day, and they had to pry his poor little body off of her so that they could take her away. Everything about the scene is just utterly devastating, and I'm leaving a lot out too
Yeah.
from the book. So, in
Jeez.
that excerpt I just read about Beto finding Carrie, it talked about him finding Naomi's shoe, even though he's looking for Carrie, and Carrie was wearing Naomi's shoe. And so that's a whole other facet of the story I haven't even talked about, why
Mhm.
they weren't wearing the right shoes. And so like I said, I encourage you to read this book because there's a whole lot more to it than everything I'm giving. Of course, reading the book is going to be a lot better, but yeah, so if you're confused by that, that is why. At this point, all the men at the oil fields were told about what happened and they were asked to leave work to go help with the cleanup and recovery. Henry, of course, is really worried about his kids and eventually finds out what has happened to them. He then finds out who it was that helped them during the blast, which is Wash, of course, and he immediately gets mad that it was Wash because he thinks that Wash is always there to save the day when in fact he should be. So it's almost like Wash, which he is providing for his family better than Henry is. And he's really jealous of this 17-year-old.
Crazy that that's what Henry's thinking about
I
right
know.
now.
I know.
Crazy.
Exactly. So he stomps off to go back to the school to help, and Wash is already there trying to help in any way that he can. But he's eventually sent home by a bunch of white men, basically accusing him of being the one that's responsible for the blast and saying that he's probably happy the whole thing happened. So they think that Wash is the one that's responsible because he was working at Mr. Crane's house when the blast happened, and Mr. Crane's house is so close to school that he was basically on scene as soon as it happened. So naturally, that means it was Wash that did it. That was
Jesus.
basically all their reasoning was. So throughout the whole book, Henry was really struggling to find his connection to the church and to do the things his pastor preached for him to do. He was just having trouble believing in general, and now he basically gave up, not believing that God would allow someone to blow up a school and send all the children in it to hell.
Jesus.
And it's insinuated that Carrie is going to hell in the book because she never got baptized in their pastor's church, even though she was baptized as a baby back home when she lived with her
Yeah.
parents. So
Jesus.
now that the timeline for leaving for Mexico has been shattered, Wash and Naomi decide that they need to leave sooner than they thought, especially because Henry is already acting more impatient about him and Naomi being together. So even though all of this trauma and like devastation has happened,
All he can
Henry's
think
still
about
got
is
it on his
how much of
mind.
a freak he is. Yeah.
Yeah, he's just like, I need to marry her, get the family all together, whatever, make it complete, whatever. It's God's plan. So while many people are grieving the loss of their children, friends, and relatives, there are a lot of other people wanting to take action. And what I mean by this is they're looking for someone to blame. A bunch of guys showed up at Mr. Gibbler's house demanding answers for why the school blew up. His daughter, Miranda, jumped into the conversation to basically put a target on Wash's head.
God.
Yeah, I know.
We hate Miranda.
I know, she's the worst. So Miranda goes, I know something. He was there when they did it, when they tapped the line. Who? Dalton called. That black boy, the one Mr. Crane always has working at the school. So what? Tad asked. And he was there when it happened. He didn't like us having such a nice school. Daddy, you heard what he said that one time when he came to see Mr. Crane with his father about some books. Something like gratitude crossed Mr. Gibbler's face. That boy. An explosion, Miranda whispered hoarsely. Then she spoke more loudly. When he walked away after sassing Mr. Crane and my daddy, he said it'd take an explosion to make us see, end quote. And then,
Yeah.
boom, is the last sentence in this part of the book. So that's where that
Jesus.
is coming into play now. Miranda happened
Looking bad for
say that.
Wash.
I know, it's just horrible luck. Like,
Yeah.
what a freaking coincidence. Now all the angry men do have someone to blame, and Wash was all too easy of a target. So they show up to the Fuller's house that night, a whole mob of white men and their sons. This even includes
Great.
this even includes Henry and Beto. Henry made Beto come with him, and Beto didn't even know where he was going. He just was told to follow his dad, so he did. And Beto can't believe that what he is seeing is true. He just wants to be with Naomi and Carrie, but that's not the case. And instead of being with Naomi and Carrie, he's with Henry and a mob that wants justice for the death of their children. Henry basically forces and threatens Beto to get him to throw a rock through the Fuller's window. And after, he managed to run away and ran straight to the church to ask Pastor Tom for help. But even after the preacher made an appearance to try and stop the men from beating Wash and his father, it didn't make a difference. The mob had already burnt down the house and they were preparing for lynching. And this is in the 1930s. And while all of this is
Ugh,
happening,
so bad.
I know. And while this is happening, Naomi is waiting for Wash inside the tree with no idea what's happening until Beto shows up. And since
Mhm.
Carrie had died, he hadn't spoken maybe a total of 2 words, and the words he had spoken were only to Wash, so he hasn't said anything to Naomi. He wouldn't
Great.
speak for a long time when he got to the tree with Naomi, but she could tell that something had made him even more upset than he had been the past few days. After a
Hmm.
while, Naomi finally got him to speak, and the only word that he would let out over and over again was wash. So Naomi leaves him in the tree to stay until she comes back for him. And she starts to walk over to Egypt Town to see what's going on with Wash. Like she thinks maybe he got in a car crash
Oh
or something
no.
like that. So when
Oh
she comes up
no.
to, yeah, I know. So when she comes up to the house to see it burnt down with the gardens ripped apart and everything else that they had destroyed, she was thinking that this is all that was lost. Like, surely the family is okay. But then she sees a sign nailed to the trunk of the huge magnolia tree in the front yard that said, like father, like son. And when she looked up into the tree, she could see the dark silhouette of 2 swaying bodies hanging from the branches.
God.
I know. Not knowing what to do other than to cry and run, that's exactly what she did, and she ran right back to Beto. They spent the night together in the tree, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, Naomi woke up to the sound of footsteps coming down the footpath, and for a split second, she thought it was Wash, but she willed the idea out of her mind, knowing that your mind will play tricks on you in situations like that. But then she heard Wash's voice saying her name. Giving herself a little bit of room to play into the fantasy, she looks up and she does actually see Wash standing in front of her. So
Mm.
he's a beaten up version of what he usually looks like, but it's actually him there, which is huge relief. Reading this, I was like, oh
Yeah.
my God, he's not dead. Oh my God. The pastor, so what happened was the pastor actually did end up talking some sense into the mob out of a lynching.
Thank
And
God.
what Naomi saw hanging from the tree were the 2 scarecrows that the Fullers had in their garden. So they were talked out of hanging the real human people. So instead, they got satisfaction from hanging these scarecrows from their front.
Ugh,
And it actually worked
horrible.
out, would you say?
It's just horrible.
I know. It's almost incomprehensible, but at the same time, it's not because of the things that we know about our history.
Yeah.
So it actually worked out that Naomi and Beto were both in the tree because Wash said that they had to leave right that instant. So Wash guides them to where his parents are and gets them to agree to take the 2 extra passengers with them because his parents had no idea what Wash's plans were. Like they didn't know that he was
Right.
on the way with Naomi. But just as they're leaving, Beto starts to cry again. And it's because he can't stand the thought of leaving his cat Edgar behind. Because with Henry, who like I said, has said multiple times that he would kill that cat or drown that cat. So now he doesn't want his
Jesus.
cat to die, and it's up to Naomi to go back, get Edgar, and the money that she had stashed away. So remember when Naomi was buying groceries for the family, she would keep a little bit of money each week for herself without
Yes.
knowing in case an emergency like this ever were to happen. So she sneaks back to the house to get this money and Edgar the cat. Despite Wash's objections, they all know that she is the only one who has the best chance of being successful in doing this. So just when you think that she did make it out of the house safely, one of the steps on the porch creak when she puts her weight on it, and it woke Henry up immediately. So he can see Naomi running away from the house when he looked outside, and he figures out what is happening, that she is running away. He quickly loads his gun and goes running after her, and he's chasing her, but Naomi doesn't know that
The
he's
gun is
chasing her.
crazy.
Yeah, he's doing it silently, so she has no idea that he actually heard her. She's just running to get away as fast as she can
Oh,
because, of course, she wants to just like get away and be
yeah.
safe.
Yeah.
So he quick loads his gun, and as he's running after her, he catches her just as she's hopping into the Fuller's car and basically rips her right out of it. Actually, he basically drags her out of it. He ends up getting Beto and Wash out of the car too, all while threatening them with the gun. And even did you see all that spit I just spit in the air? It was like 7 droplets just like
Hawk Tua,
exploded
am I right?
everywhere. What?
I said Hawk Tua, am I right?
Yeah. So back to the story. Henry managed to get the rest of the Fuller family to drive away and leave him there with Wash, Naomi, and Beto. So now that the rest of the Fuller family is gone, he marches the 3 kids into the woods
They
and
left their kid.
yeah, yeah,
Crazy.
yeah. So Wash's father, Jim, is basically just a very, very obedient man who just tries to like do what he is told so that he can avoid all conflict from anyone, but especially white people, because he wants to keep
Right.
himself and his family safe. So it's understandable, but that's kind of like where him and Wash would butt heads because Wash is more the kind of person to stand up for himself.
Right.
So that's why Jim drove away.
Hmm.
Maybe he was thinking that none of them would come out of it alive if he didn't listen. I don't know. Henry makes Beto tie Wash to a tree with a rope, and all during this, poor Beto is doing this. He's sobbing because of course he doesn't want to tie anyone to a tree, let alone Wash.
Hmm.
Then Henry proceeds to order Naomi to the ground so that he can rape her. And with Wash tied up and Beto frozen in fear, maybe not even realizing what is about to happen because he's so young, there was no one there to stop Henry because of this. So this part of the book was really hard to read because it got pretty
God.
descriptive. And all while Henry is doing the raping part, he's also punching her in the face and just beating her every time Wash yells out for him to stop.
God.
So this scene is just utterly brutal.
It's hard.
Horrible. Yeah.
It's
By
really
the end of
bad.
it, Naomi's front side is covered with blood. Her eye is swollen shut. Her lip is bleeding. Her dress is torn. And she has blood on her arms where Henry was holding her down. And so the whole time I
So
was
fucked.
reading this, I was hoping that Wash's family was going to ambush them from the woods and like force Henry to stop. But
Yeah,
unfortunately,
like a savior.
yeah. But unfortunately, that never happened. They were completely on their own. Now that Henry was finished punishing Naomi, he went over to Wash, still tied up to the tree, and basically beat him senseless. He made Beto untie him from the tree, and he fell to the ground. So now I'm going to read another excerpt of the book. Here's your chance to redeem yourself, Henry said to Beto. I'm going to give you this. He stretched out the hand that was holding the shotgun. And I'm going to hold this. He pulled the revolver out of the waistband of his pants. Wash pulled himself up on all fours. He coughed up blood and something white. Teeth, Beto realized. Wash crawled slowly towards Naomi. You remember what I showed you when we went out in the woods? Henry pressed the butt of the gun, into Beto's shoulder. If you need more shots, remember to pump it. Go on now, aim at him. He ain't moving fast. Numbly, Beto did as Henry said. His fingers remembered. Good boy, Henry said. Now shoot him, or I'll shoot your sister. Beto let the gun drop from his shoulder. I ain't playing, boy. Henry lifted the revolver and pointed it at Naomi. Beto swallowed, lifted the shotgun again, and stared down the barrel at Wash. Wash, who had taught him to fish. Wash, who had taught him to handle a hammer. Wash, who made the woods magic. Wash, who had saved him, and Wash, who had loved his sister. When he still did not shoot, Henry's face hardened. He's a murderer. He killed Carrie and all them other kids. No, he didn't, Naomi said hoarsely, pushing herself up on her elbows. Stay down, Henry warned. Beto swallowed hard. I can't. I can't. He could barely speak the words. Henry took a step toward Naomi, the gun pointed at her. 1, 2, 3. I ain't counting past 7, son. Please, Naomi gurgled. Please don't. 4, 5, 6. A shot rang out. Wash moaned. Naomi's eyes widened in disbelief. Beto gasped at what he'd made happen. So the shot that rang out was Henry shooting, and he shot Naomi in the thigh. Then he demanded that she tell Beto to shoot Wash. Of course, she refused to tell Beto that, but it was hard to listen to anything that Henry was saying with the pain she was dealing with from her leg. The distance between Wash and Naomi was only a few yards, but their broken bodies made it feel like it was a lot farther. Wash still managed to drag himself over to Naomi, though, so that they were laying next to each other.
Oh,
At this moment, they were both just thinking about making it to Mexico and nothing else. They're probably, in my opinion, I think they were just trying to dissociate from what was actually happening and just like try to
oh, for
get over
sure, right?
it. They're also just trying to pretend that it was a dream and that none of it was real. Then they heard the next shot, and now we switch to Beto's point of view, and he's staring in disbelief at the red spreading across Wash's back. The patch of blood matched the one on Naomi's chest. Of course, it was Henry that shot them, not Beto. He would never. And it finally dawns on him that this is what he wanted to happen all along. Of course, this is what Henry wanted to happen all along, not Beto.
Oh,
Henry, being the horrible person that he is still telling Beto to shoot Wash with the shotgun just to make sure, is what Henry was saying. But Beto had had
oh,
He did raise the gun to his shoulder like Henry wanted him to, only he didn't aim where Henry wanted him to. Beto shot Henry in the face. At some point in time, Jim Fuller did end up coming back and find them, but of course he was too late. He took the gun from Beto, checked for a pulse from Naomi and Wash, finding no sign of life, and he had Beto follow him back to the car, knowing now that it wasn't possible to save his son or the girl he loved, but he could save Beto.
Jesus.
I know. I told you it's super heavy. Like, I don't know how it could get worse. And now I'm going to read an excerpt again from Beto. So Beto lay there under the blanket like something smuggled, and smuggled with him were the following: 1, Edgar, curled tightly against his belly. 2, several fleas on Edgar's fur. 3, a knowledge that was an impenetrable stone. 4, a lifetime supply of guilt and what ifs. And 5, a memory. Edgar was only a cat. The fleas were of no practical use. The guilt, the what ifs, and the knowledge were for later. So Beto clung to the memory. Isn't that so heartbreaking?
That's a crazy book. Is that the end?
That is the end before the epilogue. So I decided to include what happens in the epilogue because it just rounds out the book.
Right.
And we're pretty close to the end now. But for this point in time, for the after section of the book, that is how it ends.
Wow.
Yes. So now going into the epilogue, what ended up happening to Beto was the Fullers brought Beto back to his grandparents in San Antonio. And despite him not wanting to go on and live anymore, he had given up on life at this point. He had
Of
lost
course.
everybody that cared about him. He still, went on. He lived his life, muddled through every day. And as Beto grew, he was still smart as ever. And he ended up being the first Mexican American to be permitted to follow the distinguished scholar path to graduation of high school rather than the vocational track. He was also the first Mexican American from San Antonio to attend the University of Texas at Austin. He majored in English and he wrote all the time.
Wow.
So you might remember that on Christmas, Naomi gave a notebook to Beto.
Mm-hmm.
And after all this time, he still hadn't written in it, even after he was in college. He was just waiting until he was ready to tell the
The right
story that
moment. Yeah.
he knew he needed to tell. So all this time, Beto had carried a newspaper clipping in his wallet with a news story about what ended up being written about the night Naomi and Wash died. Just days after the tragic New London school explosion that claimed nearly 300 lives, a survivor of the blast, Naomi Smith, was abducted, beaten, and raped by a Negro youth by the name of James Washington Fuller.
Crazy.
When the girl's stepfather, Henry Smith, noticed her disappearance, he suspected foul play and set out to search for her in the woods near the Negro community. I feel bad for saying that. The Negro community of Egypttown just outside of New London. He found her in the midst of the most terrible indignity a woman could suffer, and he struggled to rescue his stepdaughter from the clutches of the assailant. At some point, a gun was drawn, and an accidental discharge of the weapon killed both Naomi and Fuller. While there were no witnesses, police determined from evidence at the scene that Smith, crazed with grief and rage, then turned the gun on himself. Police haven't indicated that no further investigation will be conducted.
God.
So the whole story was obviously changed from what actually happened because we know what happened.
Yeah.
And so, as you might have guessed, Beto's going to use the notebook that Naomi gave him to write about the truth. He doesn't even want to tell the story in general, but he knows that he has to. And the last two lines of the story are, quote, "He needs you, reader. All he asks is that you take the story up and carry it for a while. The strange song gathered out of darkness," end quote. And that is how it ends.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is heavy.
I told you it was going to be heavy. It was such a good book, but it was hard.
Yeah. And honestly, like, I don't know, I think it's really important
And I
because
think,
especially just like when the book takes place, like, I feel like it's especially important for people who are not from the South to read this book, especially white people
mhm,
who are not from the South to read this book to like reconcile and remember that like this was not that long ago and it was also after like the civil, like, I don't know.
decades after
Yeah.
slavery was abolished. And yeah. So I wanted to read the author's note to you because it kind of sums up everything we were talking about. And I really like that she included this in here. So Ashley Hope Perez wrote, "The 1937 New London school explosion ravaged a community about 10 miles from my hometown. It is still on record as the deadliest school disaster in the United States. With the exception of the explosion, the tragedies that unfold in the novel are products of my imagination. Still, they are generally consistent with documented occurrences in other parts of Texas and the South during the 1930s. There is considerable historical precedent for the racism, sexual abuse, violence against minorities, and other distressing facets of life portrayed in the novel. An understandable protective impulse sometimes inspires efforts to conceal, diminish, or disavow such painful histories. The work of this book, however, was to bring to light experiences and narratives that might otherwise go unacknowledged. I have tried to balance the heartbreak, cruelty, and ignorance of my character's world with a profound attention to all forms of kindness and connection that are also possible in it." So she goes on farther to explain how the book is fictional, but it's based off of a lot of true events and things that have happened throughout history. And because of all these reasons, that is why I firmly believe that this book should not be banned and that any age a person should be able to read it because it is really eye-opening and it's hard to get through, but it's hard to learn about the history of our country and other countries and just about the world in general because horrible things take place all the time and still are taking place. And us living in ignorance about that isn't going to make anything better.
No.
So that is my stance on it.
Yeah. I mean, also just like, especially now, after, you know, the results of this election, I think everybody needs to sort of get a fire under their butt to like do the work and be uncomfortable, especially as like white people, to really learn and listen to voices that have this like history and do everything we can to like not go back to that and what we can do to like repair all of this.
Yeah. And yeah, because we don't want to repeat what has happened in history because these are atrocious things that should, I don't think should have ever taken place in general because I don't think it's very hard to be a good person, but there's a lot of people out there that make it look like it's really hard because they're nowhere near good people. Obviously, we can tell that based off of reading this book. So, and also you said that it's important for people to get uncomfortable to learn these things because it's not, to sound cliche, all sunshine and rainbows, but it's
Yeah.
important to know these things, and it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's necessary. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
Did
Well,
you like the book?
I did. That was a really, yeah, that was crazy. It was just a really beautiful and hard and incredible story.
It was. I agree.
Um,
I'm glad I started with this book. I think it was a good way to kick off the
yeah,
pod.
first pod book
Yeah.
done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Amazing.
Have any other comments on the book or anything like that? I think we've been pretty clear on our stance, what
Yeah, oh
we
my
think
God.
about the book, and um, I just think that anyone, whether you're just listening to the podcast and don't read this book, or if you do decide to read it, don't just read it or, like go about your day. Like really think about what happened in this book,
Yeah,
reflect on it, because that's when we really think hard about these things, I think that's when change can actually take
can
place.
happen.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So as a reminder, we want you to know that these books belong, and so do you.
And so do
We love
you.
you all.
Wow.
Yeah,
We did it.
we did. Good job.